A quick word before this video starts. My intention for this is not to hate on or pick on Tears of Themis and compare it to other HoYo games. I'll only use the games as reference points as it would be easier for me to lay out my ideas. As a genuinely dedicated player, this is simply an outlet for me to just talk about the game that I love. For a game that has heart-wrenching stories, incredible artworks, emotional soundtracks, and excellent voice acting, Tears of Themis has every trait that you see in other HoYoverse games. But I'm sure that at least 6 out of 10 HoYoverse fans don't even know it exists. So why is that the case? The reason could be pretty simple. This video will be divided into sections, so feel free to skip to any parts you'd like. First of all, what even is Tears of Themis? Well, it's what happened when you lose the gacha in this goddamn... In this game, you play as a graduate attorney, also known as Rosa, working at Themis law firm in Stella City in the year 2030. The main story follows you solving cases, just doing your job, usually with the help of the male leads, or MLs for short. There's Luke Pierce, your childhood friend who went away 8 years prior to participate in some confidential national project. In the present day, he's still as cheerful and positive as ever, and is now working as a detective. And how much could have possibly happened within that 8 years? More than you might think. Artem Wing is the most successful senior attorney with a win rate of 99% at 29. And he's also technically your higher up. Don't be fooled by his stoic exterior though, he's really caring and is skilled in a lot of things, besides asking out a girl. Dr. Vyn Richter is a psychiatrist who has 2 doctorate degrees.
I am a man who owns 4 ovens.
As a professional in psychology, he's capable of analyzing people's gestures, expressions, speech patterns, while also concealing his true intentions. Even though most would be quick to distrust him and consider him a red flag after playing for a while, he's an extremely complex character and most of his actions aren't easy to understand or explain. I think I'll make a video analyzing his character soon. Last of the cast is Marius von Hagen, or however you're supposed to pronounce that. He's the heir and president of PAX Group, a multinational mega corporation that holds the dominant position in almost anything you could think of. Oh, also he does art. A rich boy with a snarky attitude and is excessively teasing towards his senior. That's you, by the way. I really wonder what he's hiding under that. These guys are actually part of a secret organization called the Annex X that deals with anomalous cases. After witnessing your great accomplishments in dealing with some cases, they invited you to join. The main story focuses on you solving different cases like missing persons, murder, impersonation, a corporation's human experimentation to develop immortality drugs, etc., with the help of the guys. Oh boy, I sure do hope nothing life-threatening will happen. The setting of this game is meant to be a more futuristic, fictional city in China, which makes it, to my knowledge, the only HoYoverse game that has 0 fantasy elements in its core universe. Personally, I find this make the mystery solving of the main story even more intriguing. Besides the main story, there are 4 different routes, one for each of the guys. They're like parallel timelines since you get access to all of them and there isn't really a choice that you have to lock in. These routes are where the real romance aspect of this game come into play. So for anyone who asks why HoYoverse doesn't make a game focusing on men or dating simulator when? Well, it's all been here for 4 years. One thing I find interesting about these is the sense of progress over time, literally. For reference, the game's 4 years old for CN server, 3 years for global. When I say progression, I don't just mean how the 2nd anniversary got the ML's proposal and then 3rd anniversary got the whole moving in together to a new home thing. My point here is that as time progresses, it feels like you're building up and going through an actual relationship, albeit is a tad unrealistic and idealized. It can be quite exciting and intriguing just watching the story between the MC and each ML unfolds. Not only getting to know one another, but also slowly understanding each other's shortcomings, working through past traumas, and supporting each other to become better versions of themselves. Besides that, these stories do tend to have slight innuendos thrown into the mix, as expected from a dating simulator. But mostly, the stories are very heartwarming and extremely emotional. I won't lie when I say I cry like a baby when going through most of them. And to make things more interesting, there are also AU stories that have completely different settings from the core game's universe. These fun additions help us to see the familiar characters' dynamics and relationships play out in new and exciting scenarios that wouldn't be possible in the core universe. One thing I find enticing about Tears of Themis, whether it be main story or side stories, is that the fact that the world is so close to our reality. While solving cases, you come across all sorts of situations and come into contact with characters that display the many facets of humanity. Often it could cause you to question people's actions, motives, their nature, the strings that bind people's relationships together, the unjust hierarchy of this world, the true meaning of justice, law, and whether or not your actions can actually make the world a better place. As I've said before, the reason why this game is unpopular despite its merits can be quite obvious. Firstly, the genre itself. I firmly believe that the gaming space is inclusive and it doesn't matter who you are, you can play whatever you want. Regardless of people's beliefs though, the industry does not care. If you're in it for long enough, you'd know that the gaming landscape tends to cater more towards male players. For reference, see Honkai Impact 3rd. However, Tears of Themis is an otome game, a genre that explicitly targets female players, hence the singular choice of a female MC. As RPGs would have you placed in the position of the MC, this already excludes quite a large margin of people. But of course, since the game's genre is intended to be niche in terms of target player base, and in this case in relative to other HoYo games, I don't think it's fair to compare them in this aspect. However, it is a major factor contributing to its not so popular status, so I had to mention it. Also, 2 years ago, the game's rating in China changed from 12+, similar to Genshin, to 16+, similar to Zenless Zone Zero. That would limit the demographic quite a bit, but I doubt it would deter people from picking up the game in the first place. Also, the game's still 12+ in America App Store, go figure. The gameplay also really isn't like most other HoYo games. The game's only on mobile, and the stories have a visual novel format. The combat system with the cards isn't complicated and it doesn't require many premium cards to clear harder contents. Mostly, it's just patience and luck. So if you don't play the game for the stories or any of the characters, there's really not much else for you. The second biggest reason I believe why Tears of Themis isn't really prevalent is due to the timing of its release. The game was originally launched in China the exact year that Genshin was, just a little bit earlier, and for the global version it's exactly 1 year later. Why do I believe it's a big deal, you may ask? Well, it is without a doubt that HoYoverse popped off thanks to the release of Genshin. It would be an understatement to say that the game merely made an impact on the gaming scene. So basically, while everyone was still riding the wave that was Genshin, Tears of Themis was basically irrelevant. To illustrate my point further, just look at Honkai Star Rail. The game was released about a year before HoYoverse released another game, Zenless Zone Zero. This gave the game time to shine. Most importantly, both of these games benefited from the popularity and existing player base of Genshin and HoYo games as a whole. Tears of Themis got none of that. It was released in China before Genshin was even a thing, and I doubt the existing player base for MiHoYo games at the time would be 100% on board with the idea of an otome game. Not to mention, when the game was released in global, Genshin was still the biggest thing. So, why should Tears of Themis even get remotely the same amount of attention? To add to this, the game doesn't really advertise itself anymore. According to some users online, the game did used to advertise itself around the time of the closed beta test, but now there's practically nothing. Meanwhile, HoYo's other games still run as to this day. Before getting into this section, I'd like to say that Tears of Themis is only unpopular in relative to other HoYo games. Within the otome game genre, it's quite well known, but obviously you can't compare the company's industry-altering game to some passion project of theirs. But because this game is in the same family as several multi-million-dollar games, it is going to suffer quite a bit. However, I don't want you to believe that all the bad stuff I'm about to list are direct results from the game's current standing. We don't know what the game's actual revenue is in relative to the budget required to run it, in addition to other expenses. At the end of the day, every game needs to make enough money to keep themselves afloat, or at the very least, not drop so much in quality that they straight up shut down. I'm only listing some general points that are closely related to how the game gets players to spend money, or some things that are somewhat affected by the size of the player base. For one, the game feels mildly predatory. Now I know that's literally all gacha games. Why I say this isn't that the game has insane power creep since there's basically no endgame, but rather it's the gacha system and the currency. After doing a bunch of boring math comparing monthly passive earning to another HoYo game, Genshin, not counting events or any one-time DLC contents or RNG, turns out the maximum earning of S-chips, the equivalent of primos, is significantly more than in Genshin, but when exchanged into roles, the difference isn't that much. However, this doesn't matter too much because the bigger contender here would have to be the banners. So you have the standard banner and the limited banners, basic stuff. However, there are different types of limited banners and their pities don't carry over one another. For example, you pull on the anniversary banner and you're 10 pity away from the limited card, but you can't continue. Then you'd have to wait a whole year until that specific anniversary banner to come back to continue that pity. I almost forgot to mention that these limited types of banners use different types of tiers. And there's this limited tier that if you don't use during the time of the banner, they can expire and you can say goodbye to your hard work. Plus, there's no 50-50. What I mean is when rolling on limited banners, if you lose and get a standard, that's not a guarantee. You can get 2 or 3 standard SSRs, basically a 5-star, in a row. However, to somewhat make up for this, is the guarantee pity doesn't reset when you get a standard SSR. The pity only resets when you get the featured card. Plus, the guarantee is only 90 or 100, not 180 like in Genshin. Now you might be wondering, how bad could this possibly be? Well, let me tell you a story of what happened to me. 2 weeks ago, I pulled on the Bakerlawn Limited banner, and I did about 80 pulls. Guess how many SSRs I got? 4! That's pretty good, right? Well, too bad. They were all standard. I lost 4 times in a row. I was so upset that I gave up. And all of my hard work was for nothing because I would have to wait for another year for this banner to rerun to continue that 20 or so pity left to get the limited card. And may I remind you again, this actually happened to me. Let me talk about events real quick. There's way too much to do. Wait, wouldn't that be a good thing? What I mean is that a lot of limited time events are way too short and doesn't give much wiggle room. For most of them, if you miss more than a day, you're paying to get the limited rewards, whether with your precious S-chips or money. Along with every event, you usually have at least one new banner that goes along with it. Care to guess how much time these could go for? A week? While of course there's not much to these events besides a daily minigame and a short story, but for a debut banner to run for a week? At most, some bigger banners will run for about 20 days. As the game gets older, more cards will be added and the chance for a card to rerun, whether on the featured special banner or in the rotation banner, consistently decreases. In this game, where there's almost no meta, the only thing pushing you to pull is how much you like the character. And you better believe that fairy impulse and FOMO is going to be much more difficult to overcome than deciding how viable a card is. But honestly, given how fast some banners run and that there's no clear indicators of version, only some yearly major events like anniversaries and ML's birthdays to use as markers, it really feels like the events just keep releasing one after another with no breathing room. There's no such thing as version and drought because these events and updates aren't divided into versions. Besides the gacha currency, I see no problem with the other paid stuff like cosmetics and backgrounds. Also features like calling the ML whenever you want. What stunned me at first was how they charged you to change your name and your birthday, but I wouldn't say the game size is directly affecting its rewards and monetization model. Of course, you can play casual and not be bothered with any pay-to-win stuff, but many would have to try really hard to work with the system. Being a smaller game also doesn't just influence its monetization, but also its features and updates. Firstly, JP voices in main stories are never up to date. Quality of life features are few and far between, both in-game and on HoYo Lab. But hey, I guess it runs in the family. The final point isn't too significant, but you know if you've been in any smaller fandoms. The resource availability is really limited. Stuff like high-quality game assets, backgrounds, soundtracks are really hard to find, or worse yet, they don't even exist. Most of the high-quality stuff are usually only provided on official accounts. Because the game exists in the same sphere as absolute behemoths, it feels like a lot of pressure is put onto the game to perform well in relative to the other ones. However, being a smaller game has its merits, the most obvious being the very nature of the community. The community itself is quite small. If you scroll onto the Tears of Themis tab on HoYo Lab, it wouldn't take long to see a bunch of posts made by the same user. The same could be said if you engage in Tears of Themis content for long enough on other platforms. Additionally, a small dedicated community means less toxicity. Since everyone's just chilling and enjoying the game, there's really no controversy. Besides the occasional classic case of games adding features that is horrifically predatory and practically forces players to pay up to not fall behind. But most of the fire would start in the CN community since their servers are about a year ahead of ours, so the players there are basically the guinea pigs to the devs' experiments. Once again, small community, cozy vibes, no toxicity, and little to no drama.
You know how I long.
Despite everything I said in this video, I don't want you to leave thinking that the game is suffering. That's just being a bit too nihilistic. If you are a Tears of Themis player, you know that the status quo has been pretty much the same since the very beginning and not much has changed. After this video is done, any players would just go back to playing the game and indulging in the community, including me. Of course, the game doesn't really get acknowledged often, heck it doesn't even exist in some countries. But as for the game itself, the quality is constantly going up in terms of the art, the music, and the writing. Even if people from the outside don't acknowledge the game, the people who work on it surely do. I mean, look at this clip of Daowei on the game's 4th anniversary livestream in CN. It's so cute. What I meant to say is that Tears of Themis is another game with its ups and downs. None of us can say that the game is objectively bad purely based on what we don't like. Neither should we put the game on a pedestal and completely ignore its shortcomings. The game isn't perfect and it doesn't have to be. The game isn't really popular and it doesn't have to be. No game has to be neither of those things to be considered good. I didn't do this video expecting some major shift is going to occur or that the game would just suddenly get better. I don't like it when people make comparisons between Tears of Themis and other HoYo games, and personally, I don't like the concept of this video very much. The truth is, on its own, Tears of Themis is an incredible, exciting, and emotional experience. An increase in popularity doesn't necessarily equate to an increase in quality. In fact, I would be upset if this game were to just suddenly shoot up in popularity because it could lead to a more toxic community. Genshin and Honkai Star Rail are obvious examples. I always hate it whenever people would just start drama and only bring up Tears of Themis whenever it's convenient for them to spread hatred. Don't get me wrong, this community is always welcoming, but ruining the tranquility we have now for the sake of recognition is not worth it. And above all the incredible fan creations that have come out of this fandom is enough of a testament to how much the players love the characters, the universe, the environment that has been culminated, and how great the game is on its own. Finally, to anyone who hasn't but are interested, I suggest trying out Tears of Themis for yourself. Give it a chance. I always recommend it primarily for the main story. I personally enjoy the writing and the mystery solving, as well as the amazing music that just hits so perfectly from the most intense situations to heart-wrenching moments. And to all of my beloved attorneys watching this, I hope you enjoy the game as much as I do and will continue to look forward to the future, as surely the best is yet to come. I hope we can all stick around to experience it together. For my next video on Tears of Themis, I intend on doing some character analyses of the guys, so maybe keep a close eye out if you'd like to see that. As always, I hope you've enjoyed, maybe you've learned something new, and I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye!